do you accept the opposite to what we've been telling you, but actually positively go out and vote for it? We can't be surprised at this in many ways.
Prime Minister's coming out now
With
his wife beside him there, so that suggests a personal statement is going to come.
The country has just taken part in a giant democratic exercise, perhaps the biggest in our history. Over 33 million people from England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and Gibraltar have all had their say. We should be proud of the fact that in these islands we trust the people with these big decisions. We not only have a parliamentary democracy, but on questions about the arrangements for how we're governed, there are times when it is right to ask the people themselves, and that is what we have done. The British people have voted to leave the European Union, and their will must be respected. I want to thank everyone who took part in the campaign on my side of the argument, including all those who put aside party differences to speak in what they believed was the national interest. And let me congratulate all those who took part in the Leave campaign for the spirited and passionate case that they made. The will of the British people is an instruction that must be delivered. It was not a decision that was taken lightly, not least because so many things were said by so many different organisations about the significance of this decision. So there can be no doubt about the result. Across the world, people have been watching the choice that Britain has made. I would reassure those markets and investors that Britain's economy is fundamentally strong. And I would also reassure Brits living in European countries and European citizens living here that there will be no immediate changes in your circumstances. There will be no initial change in the way our people can travel, in the way our goods can move, or the way our services can be sold. We must now prepare for a negotiation with the European Union. This will need to involve the full engagement of the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Ireland governments to ensure that the interests of all parts of our United Kingdom are protected and advanced. But above all, this will require strong, determined and committed leadership. I'm very proud and very honoured to have been Prime Minister of this country for 6 years. I believe we've made great steps, with more people in work than ever before in our history, with reforms to welfare and education, increasing people's life chances, building a bigger and stronger society, keeping our promises to the poorest people in the world, and enabling those who love each other to get married whatever their sexuality. But above all, restoring Britain's economic strength. And I'm grateful to everyone who's helped to make that happen. I've also always believed that we have to confront big decisions, not duck them. That is why we delivered the first coalition government in 70 years to bring our economy back from the brink. It's why we delivered a fair, legal and decisive referendum in Scotland. And it's why I made the pledge to renegotiate Britain's position in the European Union and to hold a referendum on our membership, and have carried those things out. I fought this campaign in the only way I know how, which is to say directly and passionately what I think and feel, head, heart and soul. I held nothing back. I was absolutely clear about my belief that Britain is stronger, safer and better off inside the European Union. And I made clear the referendum was about this and this alone, not the future of any single politician, including myself. But the British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction. I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks and months. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination. This is not a decision I've taken lightly, but I do believe it's in the national interest to have a period of stability and then the new leadership required. There is no need for a precise timetable today, but in my view we should aim to have a new Prime Minister in place by the start of the Conservative Party conference in October. Delivering stability will be important, and I will continue in post as Prime Minister with my Cabinet for the next 3 months. The Cabinet will meet on Monday. The Governor of the Bank of England is making a statement about the steps that the Bank and the Treasury are taking to reassure financial markets. We will also continue taking forward the important legislation that we set before Parliament in the Queen's speech. And I've spoken to Her Majesty the Queen this morning to advise her of the steps that I'm taking. A negotiation with the European Union will need to begin under a new Prime Minister. And I think it's right that this new Prime Minister takes the decision about when to trigger Article 50 and start the formal and legal process of leaving the EU. I will attend the European Council next week to explain the decision the British people have taken and my own decision. The British people have made a choice. That not only needs to be respected, but those on the losing side of the argument, myself included, should help to make it work. Britain is a special country. We have so many great advantages. A parliamentary democracy where we resolve great issues about our future through peaceful debate. A great trading nation with our science and arts, our engineering and our creativity respected the world over. And while we are not perfect, I do believe we can be a model of a multiracial, multi-faith democracy where people can come and make a contribution and rise to the very highest that their talent allows. Although leaving Europe was not the path I recommended, I am the first to praise our incredible strengths. I've said before that Britain can survive outside the European Union, and indeed that we could find a way. Now the decision has been made to leave, we need to find the best way. And I will do everything I can to help. I love this country, and I feel honoured to have served it. And I will do everything I can in future to help this great country succeed. Thank you very much.
Prime Minister with Samantha, his voice breaking as he said those last words, announcing that he was going to stand down and they needed a new leader, a new Prime Minister by October, and only then would negotiations, he seemed to say, under the new Prime Minister, begin with the EU. He said that he'd been head, heart and soul, held nothing back in his belief that Britain was safer inside the EU, but it wasn't the future of politicians that was at stake. And the country had decided what they had decided, and he would go along with it. So the Prime Minister has, in effect, stood down, but not for another 3 months until the Conservative Party conference. How those 3 months will be spent, I don't know. Anna Soubry, what's your immediate reaction to what you've heard?
I think it's terrible.
Terrible.
Terribly sad. I mean, I think truthfully he had no alternative. And I just hope he'll be remembered. You know, here he was. This is a true body blow. Because he led from the front and he comes out and he's shown as ever this beautiful composure, this remarkable leadership, this great courage to admit, look, you know, I put my neck on the line and here we are. But his testimony will be, as he said, you know, same-sex marriage, trying to do the best for poor people at home and abroad. He's been a remarkable Prime Minister, and I hope that this won't cloud our memory of him.
Laura Kunsberg from Downing Street. We're now then faced with a leadership battle between now and October, and according to the Prime Minister, before negotiations can begin with the EU, if I understood him rightly.
Yes, we certainly are. So 3 very big headlines in there. Of course, the first, that the Prime Minister has decided that he has really no option but to walk out of Downing Street, to leave this place where he's been in charge for the last 6 years. The ultimate irony, of course, that the younger, fresh-faced Tory leader who years ago told his party to stop banging on about Europe made a decision to hold a referendum to bang on about Europe himself, which has ultimately cost him his job. His closest colleagues have always called him a lucky politician. But on this ultimate gamble, well, his luck has dramatically run out. But as you say, he was very clear, and it appears this was part of his decision, that triggering Article 50, the beginning of those vital negotiations with other countries in the EU, should be done under a new Prime Minister, under new leadership, and that, in his view, cannot therefore start until the Tory party conference in October. So Article 50 will not be triggered immediately. And I have to say, really, this morning he's saying two things that are the polar opposite of what he said repeatedly in the campaign. He repeatedly said he wouldn't have to resign if he lost the vote. And he repeatedly said that as Prime Minister, he would trigger that Article 50, those vital negotiations, immediately. On both of those two things, after the result overnight, his calculations have completely changed.
How effective can he be? There'll be a battle going on within the Tory party over who's to succeed him. How effective can he be at doing what he described as everything to steady the ship? I'm going to steady the ship, but I'm not the captain to lead it to the next destination.
I think it's extremely difficult because authority is drained away from him really overnight, and it's going to be very difficult to see what kind of influence he can have now over whether it's domestic policy or handling those relations around the EU. You know, there's a European summit next week in Brussels. He said he was still going to go. He's going to go and explain his decision and probably have to explain this referendum result to the counterparts, those other European leaders with whom he's dealt for many years. But you're absolutely right. This means that for the Conservative Party, now their focus inevitably will move to who is going to succeed him. And frankly, the entire referendum campaign has been laced through with Tory leadership ambition in any case. You know, we've all talked incessantly, because it's been part of the story, about people's decisions, which campaign to go for. Did Boris Johnson jump for out because of his ambition? That's certainly part of the mix. What about Michael Gove, who's now become a very much better known figure in the Tory party because of his decision? It seems pretty clear to me that for people who are interested in the top job, we know who they are. Their focus now will not be our relations with the EU. They will be the Tory leadership battle, and battle will already have commenced. And I know that this morning there have been discussions among some of the people who fancy their chances about the best way forward already.
Just on that, and I want to ask you about the Chancellor of the Exchequer after this, but just on that point, if you've got candidates, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, possibly Theresa May, will this process actually start soon? I mean, they have to have this vote among MPs and then take two candidates out to the Conservative Party in the country, don't they? When would you expect that all to happen?
Right. Well, I think probably pretty soon. I mean, the parliamentary term is due to run for another 4 weeks. That period will, for many Tory MPs, be all about whose names get on that final ballot. Very briefly, unlike the Labour Party, essentially, Tory MPs decide who from quite a wide field gets down to 2 places on the ballot paper. So Tory party members only have a choice between 2 candidates. So there will be now frantic wheeler dealing behind closed doors among the Conservative Parliamentary Party. And just think of this too, that the Tory party membership, which only numbers about 150,000 people, are going to choose our next Prime Minister. Now, there's all sorts of speculation, of course, this morning in Westminster about an early election because of what's happened, because of how this result has upended politics. That's got to be more likely if you think that the next Prime Minister will be chosen by a vote of 150,000 people. And particularly while Jeremy Corbyn is still in place in the Labour Party, who most Conservatives assume they would beat quite easily in an election, that is their view. There would, of course, be a temptation for whoever becomes the Tory leader and the next Prime Minister to call for an early election. So not only overnight, and with this statement, do we have the prospect of a new Prime Minister, but an increasingly likely prospect of an early election too.
Gordon Brown, of course, was criticised for not calling an election after he became Prime Minister.
Absolutely.
Because people view the Prime Minister now as the elected person at an election, not as somebody who just, you know, you change them at will. So there would be pressure to have an early election, no doubt. But what about the Chancellor of the Exchequer? If we're talking about a steady ship, does it mean George Osborne stays in place for the time being?
I think for the time being, you would expect that. But as David Cameron has basically said, he'll be gone within 3 months. I think the widespread assumption would be that George Osborne would go at that point too. George Osborne, for a long time, has been seen as sort of really joined at the hip. Some people even call it the Camborne project. You know, George Osborne and David Cameron have been together step by step in the early days of their leadership, their joint leadership almost, when they were sort of young bucks who surprised everybody by taking over the Conservative Party when they were comparatively young. Of course, George Osborne was the youngest Chancellor for decades. But most people would now assume that as David Cameron has been defeated, as he has been snubbed, the public have overturned him really, that also applies to George Osborne, who's had a particularly bruising 6 months or so, a budget that unravelled. His own strategy through this campaign has been rubbished by very many Conservative MPs, with dozens of them going on the record to say that his position would be untenable if Brexit was to happen, which was essentially a coup in waiting. And I think further on from that, that means in this Tory leadership contest, George Osborne's chances are pretty slim. And frankly, he is a cunning politician. He will not run unless he thinks he's got a real chance of winning. So I think, as things feel this morning, it's pretty unlikely that his name would be on the ballot paper. And that is surprising, given for so long in Westminster he was seen by a lot of people loyal to the government and the Tory party as very much the heir apparent.
Laura, thanks very much. So the news that the Prime Minister David Cameron has said he'll do everything to steady the ship for the time being, but that he's not the captain to take Britain to its next destination. And he believes that by October there should be a new leader. He's in effect triggered a leadership race. He's going to stand down. They need a new leader by October. He's told the Queen this, he said, and negotiations about a new Prime Minister will start. And he doesn't believe that the negotiations with the EU, that is the triggering of Article 50, which says, in effect, we want to leave, we have 2 years to discuss how we're going to do it. He doesn't believe that should happen right away, contrary to what he said during the campaign. He believes it should wait for the new Prime Minister to get in place. And then there's the whole argument about whether the new Prime Minister will feel he has the authority to do it without having a general election. So all that is for the future. Let's join Emily now, up there in the gallery. Emily.
It is the breathtaking speed with which these things happen. I'm joined by Isabel Hardman and Andrew Rawnsley, who've been with us at intervals throughout the night. And just to look at